Good morning. Welcome back. Hope you all had a nice Thanksgiving. Yeah, dealt with traffic and traveling and all that kind of stuff. It's amazing that it's Thanksgiving, no matter how often I teach this class, Thanksgiving comes, it's like 10 years of your life with them. So where did it all go? So we've got a lot of wrapping up to do, a lot of consolidating, a lot of review. There's bits and pieces of things that I set out that I want to teach that I realized during the break I haven't hit yet. So I'm going to be cramming a lot of stuff in these last 2 weeks. There's going to be some means of evaluating you guys at some point, which you'll find out about when it happens. Not a big deal there. Couple things. This is the time of year, the beginning of this class, when the class comes off the weekend and they think, why the hell did he assign a short story as part of the curriculum for this class? And did anybody actually read it? Hopefully you all did, thank you. And there's a couple reasons I assigned it. One is, it is a fabulous short story. It is if you were a student of writing, or you just like reading, it was just so beautifully written. And it's just such a nice story, such a nice character study. Apparently, it's the most popular piece of fiction that Esquire magazine ever ran. And Esquire magazine, of course, nowadays, like, what's a magazine? But Esquire magazine used to be a very seriously considered magazine. It was sort of aimed at men, but it wasn't sleazy. And anyway, so I've always loved the story. The second part about it, the reason I assigned it, is that there is an aspect to starting something new. And the more different it is, and the more radical it is, there is a part of it where there's a long period of time where you're right and everybody else is wrong. And the more right you are, and the more uniquely right you are, the more people will try to talk you out of being right. And that was this story. Like, there's a little guy, he works in a hardware store, unassuming, takes violin lessons, and decides he wants to play probably the hardest violin concerto there is. And one after another, everyone, all these important people try to talk him out of it. And he just keeps going on his way. Never loses his cool, never gets defensive about it. Just figures, all right, at some point I'll get up on stage and I'll play it. And it'll be what it is. And that's very much akin to what we're doing here. You know, a lot of the things that pass for entrepreneurship are very valuable, but kind of small iterations from what exists before. Some of them are just completely radical. You know, completely different. You know, and people will naturally not like being out of their kind of quote unquote comfort zone on it. So lots of being talked out of it. So we all need a little bit of Harry Belten in us to do this kind of thing. And that's why I assigned the story. You know, it's just it's a pleasant way to spend 20, 25 minutes. If this class is anything like past classes, sometime in the next decade, one or two of you will write to me and say, you know that story you assigned us to? I still remember it. And it turned out that it was kind of true. So that's the purpose of doing that. Today, we've run through, sadly, we've run through our speaker series, which I thought this year was just fabulous. I was so, every week, some another really compelling story after another. The good news is that you guys have it under your belts, you're exposed to it, The bad news is you're stuck with just me for the last few sessions of the class, so we'll just deal with that. I want to go, this is the day I call the MBA in a day, where I try to run through some accounting, some finance, some intellectual property, patent law, all that stuff really, really fast, just to plug some holes in everyone's knowledge. Some of you, like my one budding investment banker that I let in every year, you will probably be able to sleep through some of this lecture. That's okay. You may learn something too. The rest of you, my scientists, my engineers, you probably know a lot of this already. You just picked it up along the way, or maybe you studied a little bit of it. But hopefully we'll just kind of fill in the gaps so that there's some vocabulary that you didn't have prior that you'll have now. Starting in the second hour, I do want to open up, I know a couple of you still want to pitch to the class. As we've gone through, with something I learned this year, which you just learn on the fly. Since the last time I taught the class, beginning of the pandemic to now, with the changes in gene therapy and base editing and genome editing and synthetic biology, things that I've driven us into cul-de-sacs into while lecturing, because very important, that I really never had to cover before. A lot of time went by and got used up, and for things I often use other things, time that I use for other things, such as more pitching. So we've done a little less pitching this class than we've done in the past. Don't worry that I'm going to evaluate you differently if you have or have not. But if you do want to get in front of the class and pitch, please let me know. I want to give you that opportunity. So at 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock, we'll open it up. A couple of you have written to me, asked if you can pitch this week. Of course you can, and we'll move on there. Any questions before we get started? Okay. Apologies about the 2 classes that were recorded that there was no sound for. I'm like appalled by that. For a couple of reasons. One is, a couple of you were out for a few of those for good reasons. And I feel badly that you have to rely on borrowing someone's notes. Secondly is, I think that was Piraya and Yasmi talking. And I feel terrible that we don't have that recorded, so you guys can go back to it. So, so what I'm doing is I actually put a redundant system in the back. I've got an iPad recording this too, so hopefully one of the 2 systems will work. But again, apologies on that. So it's week 12. I want to hit patents for briefly. Now, there are entire law school courses in patent law. So we're going to skim it's not even skimming the surface. We're like flying over the skimming of the surface. We just want to get some basic vocabulary. What is a patent? It's pretty straightforward. It's an exclusive right to the monetary and what other gain comes from a concept or idea that you come up with in exchange for sharing it with the world. So obviously nobody can steal an idea from you if you never share it, but it's not going to proliferate and scale unless you find a way to do that. And this goes all the way back to the Constitution. Late 1700s, it's written into the US Constitution. We had a bunch of innovators there that knew that if we were going to invent stuff and let the world, make sure that it went out into the world, we had to give an incentive to the innovators to put the work in and share it, not to keep it themselves. So they came up with patents. Patents are country specific. You can get a patent for something in most countries, but there's not necessarily reciprocity from one place to the next. Sometimes it makes it easier to get a patent somewhere else, if you have one somewhere in the beginning. But don't assume, I've got a US patent, I can go ahead and, I'm protected in Europe or in Asia, wherever. That's not the case. It's limited in terms of time and geography. A patent is not a patent forever. One of the things that makes the biotech industry and the drug industry work is the ideal that you have a patent protection for about 20 years, and then whatever you invented goes generic, and then we've got this stockpile of open for competition, i.e. market forces and cheap prices, drugs that are out there. Now, that gets kind of screwed up in actuality as companies extend patents and make minor changes and get new patents and things of that sort. But that's the basis of patents. And it's one of the 4 pillars of starting your company, if you remember. We talked about, structure, identification, communication being one, proof of concept being another, funding being a third, and then 4th, identification of what's proprietary and a strategy to protect it. Now, when people think of IP, patents are the first thing they think about, but it's not the only thing. There's the concept of trade secrets. Coca-Cola still, supposedly, no one knows the recipe for Coca-Cola. If there was a patent on it, it would have expired a long time ago. So, at this point, I think people taste Coke when they see the red can, but that's besides the point. Trade secrets is one, first mover advantage is another, constant innovation, staying a step ahead of what your competitors in the marketplace are doing is another. But certainly, trying to protect your intellectual property, trying to place a legal barrier around other people using what you're doing, and this is a key part of patents, it's not illegal for someone to use something that you patented. You have it's up to you over how it's used. They have to come to you for permission, or you have to grant a right of some sort. Like Roche, the pharmaceutical company in Switzerland, enormous multinational company, they have the patents for PCR, for polymerase chain reaction. I've only said that 1 million times in my life, and I always trip over it. So, if you're going to do PCR, you need to go through Roche. Now, Roche is extremely generous with academia. Obviously, if they're going to do a per-click charge every time somebody did a PCR, a lot of the research that's done in chemistry, biochemistry, biology, would be, cumbersome or too expensive. So they just provide a license. And an example of it's not like you can't use something that's patented. You can, but the patent holder sets the rules by which it's used. And it's an important distinction. So what's patentable? Well, what's patentable subject matter? It's got to be useful. You got to show what it's used for. People don't typically patent art. You can copyright things you write or things you compose. You can trademark, you can't patent it. It's got to be novel. It's got to be something that's new, different, either new in execution, a new way of approaching the use. It can't just be a minor, usually not minor modification of something that's out there. You can't take somebody's patented thing, paint it a different color, and get a patent on that. It's got to be important, it's got to be non-obvious. The framers of the constitutions, the people that run the USPTO, do not want to keep people from using common sense and a little bit of creativity and imagination and solving problems in parallel because someone has patented something that everybody else is going to figure out too and try to charge everybody for it. And it's got to be written down. It's got to be a best mode. It's got to be a good way of solving this problem. If you come up with a lousy means of, if you invented a lousy cotton gin back in the 1800s, and someone comes along and invents a much, much better one, then that is the basis by which they may be able to get a patent for something that solves the same problem in a much more efficient way. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't need to go through the first patent holder. First patent holder may have a means by which they get a say in how that new patent is used. But it gets very complex, but these are kind of the basic tenets of what's patentable, what's not. Question?
Can you have a patent on a software product?
Well, software patenting is way above my pay grade, but there's actually the best answer I can give you is I don't know, because if I try to give you a generalized answer, I'm probably going to be more misleading than I'll be illuminating. So let's defer that one to. Yeah, I always approach this part of this lecture with trepidation, because this is something that should really be taught by someone with a legal background. Question?
So with drugs, if there's a drug that receives approval and another drug is proven better, then that drug gets removed from the market?
No, not necessarily. Yeah, we'll get to drugs in a minute, but there's an awful lot of drugs that are all patented for the same indication, and then they have to fight it out in the marketplace. We'll get over what constitutes patentable in the drug industry.
But I guess that doesn't, my example doesn't work, but for a patent, if the patent office decides that object B is much better than object A, can it remove object A's patent?
Many possible tricks. They could give you a patent right next to the old patent and let you fight it out in the marketplace. You can, there's, you do patent B, patent holder A can sue patent holder B, can challenge patent B. Lots of ways this gets fought. Patents is a full employment act for lawyers. There is an entire, you will never hurt for work if you're a patent lawyer with a technical vocabulary. If you understand chemistry, if you understand technology, if you've got a specialized vocabulary and you know patent law, you will never hurt for work. You will be selling your minutes, but you'll get a lot for those minutes. Next slide. Now, what's the time frame for patents? You have to decide when you want to start the process, when you want to plant your flag and fill out a provisional patent application. Because typically you've got about 20 years from that point till the end of your protection. So you want to make sure that the idea is fully enough vetted along, defensible. You've done some degree of homework, you've spoke to someone who's done a prior intellectual property search to make sure that you're not like challenging someone else's patent, or there's so many other things out there similar that it's not to be worth all the time. And if you file this application, that's when the clock starts ticking. You've got this period of time, a year to almost 3 years, to really lay your case out for why it's patentable, make your decisions for what countries you're going to apply in, you're going to file in, and get your final applications done. This is a long, laborious process, and not one that you do kind of in your spare time. It's one that you don't want to do alone. There are a few things you don't want to do your own dentistry, you don't want to do your own surgery, you don't want to go about the patent process without a lawyer. So, thankfully, like in a place like Columbia, you've got a terrific tech transfer office, which is, by the way, where the slides came from. And they will walk you through this. It's their job to facilitate the establishment and the protection of intellectual property. So Columbia reaps billions of dollars a year from the returns from the IP that they've done. So they know how to do this. It's a good partner to have as you go forward. But this first step, I'm planting my flag right now, I'm getting the clock to start, and I'm filing that provisional patent. It's got to be done within a year. And then during that time, you're getting all the data you need to support this. And you apply for the US and elsewhere, your final patent applications. That can take several years in each country to come through. It's a back and forth process. It's a pain in the neck. And there are ways of screwing it up. As a student, you can screw up your patent application as a grad student, as a postdoc, whatever, just by sloppily putting the information out there. it's best to be very cagey with this stuff. What does that mean? Manuscripts, abstract slides, posters. If you've invented a molecule, don't put the chemical structure there for people to copy. Don't stick it in a handout. Don't put it on a screen where someone can take a picture of it. You know, God knows, don't put it in a manuscript and publish it. If you do that, you lose the basis for your patent. Okay? Do not try to profit from your patent. If you've got something that's going to be the basis of an intellectual property application, and you start trying to, you know, build a product and sell it on the basis of that, and somebody takes that thing apart and starts using your technology, you have no say in the fact that they're stealing your IP. So while all this is going on, be very, very careful not to give someone access to what it is you're trying to protect. Similarly, something as simple as your work in a laboratory. This is going to be the basis of some of your patent application. You've got to put your lab notes in here, and you've got to make the lab notes sacrosanct. It's the difference between a Word document and a PDF. You go back and you can change a Word document. You can't change, well, in theory, you can change a PDF. But you want to, everything's got to be in ink, everything's got to be signed. If you make a change in something, cross it out, initial it, put a date and time. You got to be really, really compulsive about this. If somebody comes back and challenges your patent, they literally can go back to the lab notes that you base some of your IP on. You know, that you did these experiments, the experiments showed this, the extrapolation of information from it, the inferences were taken to verify these assumptions. This has all gone into the validity of the patent application. Somebody wants to challenge that, and some of these patents are extremely valuable. So you will have patent lawyers putting a lot of time on contingency, doing a tremendous amount of work, going through very, very in-depth into the supporting documents. So if you're doing work that's going to lead to a patent application, you've got to be real compulsive about it. And this is something that the IP people here, the tech transfer people here at Columbia stressed. Now, there was a question here from somebody. Yeah.
I was wondering if you can patent like a procedure.
Okay. It gets tricky. Generally, you patent tangible things. You can't patent an idea. You can't patent something that comes out of nature. Is a terrific book that just got released. Bad on me for not knowing the title off the top of my head, about how Myriad Genetics patented the BRCA gene so they could do the diagnostic test for women with the higher risk for ovarian and breast cancer from it. So that gets very tricky. Now, when you try to patent an idea or a process, in general you can't, unless, this is where it gets really complicated. There's probably entire courses on how to skirt the issue of patenting an idea or a process. And this gets back to rule number 5 here, ambiguity. What is an idea, what is a process, versus the tangible manifestation of that idea and that process. And this is the kind of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin argument that goes on in courtrooms over patent challenges, things of that sort. So it's a great question, and my best answer is to run around it. Okay? Other questions? Okay. Briefly about our favorite industry, biotechnology. There's different types of patents, particularly when you're talking about a specific new molecule, one that doesn't exist out in the world, or one that exists that has something added to it. You add something maybe as simple as adding a hydroxyl group to it, or changing the hydrogens to deuterium. You can have the most valuable patent is what we call a composition of matter patent. You own that chemical structure. And of course, you want to own the structure, you want to own as many variants as you came up with. You want to own the cis version, the trans version, the racemic, the isomers. As much of the molecule as you can. If somebody wants to use that molecule, they've got to go through you. Now, that's one basis. A little bit more common is what we call a use patent. And you can have a patent that you, using this molecule, once the composition of matter patent runs out, you can come up with use patents that in certain uses, only you are allowed to, manufacture, package, and sell. Whether it's the molecule used in a certain formation, whether it's one that was, something you're using it, like all the different routes of administration of a drug, for example. In some cases, it can be used for a specific disease, a specific indication, under specific circumstances. Lots of ways of parsing out uses where, in some cases, it's a little exploitative. You've got molecules that have been used and compounded for decades that sell like cheap generic drugs, a few pennies a pill. Someone comes along and patents it for the use in an orphan disease, and then suddenly the price is $1,000 a dose. $5,000 a dose, $7,000 a dose. It's something there's not necessarily a social good that comes from it, but it is a strategy that the biopharma industry sometimes uses. And there's all sorts of ways of extending patents. You've got the patent on something, you invented this drug, you sell it you got your patent, you got it approved somewhere in that 20 years. A company will come to me when they're pitching their products that they're in development, and they'll say, we have IP protection till 2032. And then, of course, we have a life extension strategy that we think will take us to 2040, which may involve going from a pill to a capsule, or going from 4 times a day to once a day. Various ways of taking the same active ingredient and giving yourself longer life, longer protection, which what does that translate into? Higher price. Remember, what's rule number 4? Know where your price comes from. Recall earlier in the class, we talked about the commodity side and the monopoly side, and then everything in the middle. So what takes something from a commodity to a monopoly? Well, if you have the exclusive ability to produce it, package it, and sell it, then you got a monopoly. Then you decide where on the demand curve you live. What's one of the simplest ways to get a monopoly, i.e. to get total price control out of patent? If you're the only one allowed, if you choose to sell something, then you control the marketplace, then you control the price. If there's lots of challenges to the patent, or the patent's meaningless, then you've made the mistake of thinking you have a monopoly on a commodity, and your business plan will fail. We talked about that earlier. A bunch of questions.
If you have like a drug patented, like maybe as a tablet, and then you want to make it a capsule, can another company, like a generic company, come along and patent it as a capsule? There's protection for the formula, right?
Maybe. What they may be able to do is they can come in and make the old tablet.
Okay.
The normal ways, the traditional ways, you've got the tablet versus capsule, maybe. Let's just use that as an example, a theoretical example. What usually happens is the generic company comes along and makes the old version. Therefore, if it's essentially pretty much the same thing, that limits somewhat the value of the new patent. Like, am I going to really pay 5 times the price for the capsule than I would for the tablet? And of course, a lot of this gets into the silliness of how drugs are priced and marketed, because between the doctor prescribing for the patient and then through the insurance company that decides on reimbursement, the pharmaceutical distributor, the PBMs, and then who ends up paying what? The insurance company, the out-of-pocket, and in some cases, reimbursement of the out-of-pocket by the drug company, the whole system gets screwed up. So you may find an awful lot of terrible economics, a lot of resource waste, and a lot of unnecessary movement to get the same molecule into people because of this, but that's just what we're stuck with. There's another question. Yeah.
So if you have a composition of matter,
Composition of matter.
patent,
And then, your deadline, the expiry date is coming up, how would you decide if you want to go for the patent extension route or use the patent route?
Oh, if you're a drug company with a drug on the market, this is something you think about all the time. The same way when you start your company, your IP is in theory 25% of your brain power. Later on, it's still 25% of your brain power. If you're thinking, every one of the drug companies out there has a slide in their internal deck and a little picture in their mind of when things go off patent. And refilling the revenue pipeline is part of the way you run a pharmaceutical. So they think about it all the time. Question?
So, to give someone approval to use your patented molecule,
Right.
can you ask for payment now to the patent?
You can do whatever you want.
Okay.
That's just a contractual agreement between you and somebody else. I don't believe there are any specific, there probably are, because again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't believe there are any specific limitations to company A and company B finding a way to meet both of their needs in the middle. So, it's a good question. I think they're kind of free to negotiate whatever they want, as long as it doesn't result in the restraint of trade. That's where the FTC comes in. If it looks like the two companies are conspiring to artificially limit the supply and keep the price up, that's illegal. And you can't do that. So that'll get you in a lot of trouble for that.
So you were mentioning when you were talking about use patents, someone taking a pill or a compound that's existed for a long time and patenting it for like a specific disease. I was wondering, does that mean that that compound can't be patented at all for other uses?
Not at all. Not at all. And usually it goes along with a change in administration. You can't suddenly say, okay, everybody can take this pill. Now I'm patenting it for headaches. Therefore, if you're going to prescribe it for a headache, you got to go through me. Typically, there's a change in the dosing, the administration, something. There may be more or less of the active pharmaceutical agreement with EPI inside the pill. It's not like they said, okay, suddenly Tylenol, it's like Tylenol for arm pain. It's like I want a patent on that. It's not where you've got to come up with a new means of administering it. Other questions here?
So when you file for a patent, does all the information about the molecule become public? It's like, could you possibly file for a patent and not have anyone know what the molecule?
Well, certainly the patent office does. And once you file, I believe those applications are public knowledge. However, you filed. In fact, you filed a provisional patent on a date. At that point, somebody else could file, but if you filed first,
It's yours.
it should be yours. Now, there are exceptions to that, and I know in the software world, it's crazy. So I don't want to go too far generalizing, but typically the way the process works, you can go online right now and pull, do a patent search, and all these applications come up. Everybody knows what's out there to an extent. There's some aspects you don't have to put in, but again, I don't want to outkick my coverage here and say, get too into details about that. It's a level of from one industry to the next, from one type of patent application to the next. I would probably be overgeneralizing. Question here.
All the patents that arise from one patent family, would they have the same duration? Or do companies use this, like if not, do companies use this strategy to get like market monopoly?
Oh yeah, they try to extend it as long as possible. So it's certainly you want to make your initial patent very strong. You don't want to patent the cis isomer and leave the trans isomer. You want to get a lot right there in the beginning, but then there's all sorts of extensions, particularly again in chemistry. There's all different ways of doing minor alterations of molecules to try to keep the therapeutic benefit and come up with some perceived advantage that lets you just keep going back to the well and getting the benefits from that patent. Other questions? Who hasn't asked a question? Okay.
If say somebody reverse engineers a pill that is already present, without knowing its composition, is that still patent infringement?
Yeah, it's like if you accidentally come up with the same thing and somebody's going to patent, it's like, yay you for figuring it out, but you don't get, it's not like you get grandfathered into the patent clause.
Yeah, so if a drug company has like an asset in phase 2 and they're interested in expanding the label to a different indication, to my understanding, it's still constrained to the same patent, like
Yeah.
lifespan.
Yeah, it's the same drug.
Yeah. I guess my question is, how would that relate to like a use patent? I guess if it would be used for like a different purpose. I don't know how you can answer that. Do you know why it wouldn't be considered like a new now patentable for something?
You know, that's a really good question, and I'm tempted to give you a facile answer that's probably going to be very limited. And under rule number 3 there, I'm going to take a pass on that one. It's a very good question, but I don't have a great answer for it. A question back there.
Yeah, I was gonna ask how patents are inherited or transferred if you, for whatever reason, the person that was patented under is no longer able to do whatever like they want to give it to somebody. Is there a way to transfer it, and is that something that's like commonly done?
Well, it's an asset. A patent is an intangible asset that presumably you as a company own. In the balance sheet, remember we talked about the way a balance sheet's put together, you have your assets, and we go from the shortest term to the longest term, i.e. we go from the ones that are easiest to put a value on to the ones that are hardest. Patents are at the bottom of your list of assets. It's one that actually does not show up on the balance sheet until you sell the company, in which case it gets lumped in as goodwill. And that's something that we may have a chance to talk about today if we get past the patent questions. Next question.
So I think like in academia, it seems that there's a surplus of technology and then you kind of just try to patent whatever you can. But at biotech companies now, is the relationship between the research arms and the patent kind of like the legal side, identifying gaps and then basing your research around those gaps, or is it kind of
It's a good conceptual question, and within the biotech companies themselves, like what are universities? They are knowledge producers. Biotechnology companies are producing solutions to specific problems. Find a solution, try to figure out what the IP landscape is once you come up with that solution. Is there a process while you're doing that intellectual exercise that you seek to fill a gap in the IP landscape? That's a great question, and I can imagine that there are probably people with that type of knowledge. You see someone say, nobody's ever developed this, and there's a market for it, and if you can figure out how to do it, it's patentable. Where does that play into the business plan? I guess, in theory, it can play in anywhere. Is it the germ of the idea? That's, there's this, ideas can come from anywhere. And there are certainly groups that study IP and try to figure out, IP vulnerabilities and things of that sort. But I guess the best answer to that is there's probably somebody out there basing a strategy and a business plan on that particular vacuum within the IP ecosystem. But I just don't know anybody who actually has that business plan. Let's make this the last question on it.
So patent exclusivity ties directly to whether or not generics can be created for drugs.
I think it's the other way around. Generics for drugs can be created. Generics can be created once there's no longer patent exclusivity. So you invent something, you patent it, 20 years run out, you don't have an extension strategy, and suddenly all of the generic drug makers all over the world, hey, I got the chemical structure, I'm gonna go ahead and make this. Now, recognize in this industry there's an enormous distinction between small molecule pharmaceutical drugs and large molecule biotech drugs in terms of the way generics work. In small molecules, in Lipitor, I've been taking Lipitor every morning for a long time. Unless the world changes a lot, a bunch of you will too at some point. It's a benign drug, it's cheap, and it's generic. It'll always be generic. No one's gonna invent a new Lipitor. Oh, tomorrow somebody will announce a new Lipitor. Biotech drugs, large proteins, much more difficult to manufacture, much more expensive. Small molecules can make a garage. You got a good chemistry set in a nice clean garage. You can make generic drugs. You can get approval. Biotech drugs obviously much more involved. Every biotech drug manufacturing process, because of the complexity, because of the reliance on living culture systems, is in some way unique. So the molecules that come out of biotech drug protein factory A and B with the same recipe will be subtly different. Therefore, the normal generic equations don't quite work, and it falls into something called biosimilars. Biosimilars have been something that has been a work in progress for 20 years. They're probably longer. Because these biotech drugs go off patent, and you would think, okay, great, you got these drugs, incredibly expensive. Let's let the generic companies come in. It's not so simple. It's not simple, and the IP is not simple. The normal means by which the FDA regulates it is not simple, and has been an evolving process. And because of that, there's very, very, very few examples of biosimilars that are on the market. And the biosimilars that are on the market have just a small drop in price than what the branded drug is. So this is something that during your careers, those of you who go into this industry, you're going to see this evolve into a thing that works in a consistent way. Right now, if you want to just drive yourself crazy, try to generalize the way biosimilars work, because it really doesn't work. Okay. Lots more we could talk about this. I want to move on. We've got a bunch of other things to hit on. There is an entire department of marketing, a couple hundred yards from here at the Columbia Business School. I am going to try to summarize all of marketing in about 5 slides. And obviously pharmaceutical marketing, biotech marketing is a very specific type, but it's helpful to think about your specific industry, your specific company. We talk about when you do your pitch, what problem you're solving, and who are the people affected by it. Marketing is, okay, we've solved the problem with the product. How do we get it to those people? How do we go from line 1 of our elevator pitch to line 2? And we're going to wrap it up into a simple mnemonic here, 5 Ps. The product, the price, the placement, the promotion, and the people. Makes it easy to remember. This is literally the same lecture that I got a long time ago when I did my undergraduate course in marketing in Philadelphia. So the product itself, pretty straightforward. What is it you're selling? Is it a tangible thing? Is it a service? Is it a prescription? Is it a subscription? Is it a prescription? How do you get it? What specifically are you selling? And this is the tangible thing. The marketers would say, oh, we're selling the future. No, tell me what you're really selling. What is it that the person walks out of the store with? Or the thing that gets developed? Okay? So define it very specifically. And this goes into, okay, what is it? And then you think, okay, well, where does it sit within the marketplace? What kind of competition does it have? What is the nature by which the price gets derived? When I first started this course 12 years ago, I was talking to a few very smart people, smarter than me, who were primarily business people. At the time, I still kind of had one foot in medicine, one foot in business. I said to them, if you want to unravel the business world for really smart people that don't have business vocabulary, where do you start? If you want to, you're an archaeologist, you want to try to understand the world of where your business sits or the world of where this problem is solved, what's the one question you want to focus on? And the smartest of this group all said the same thing. Know where the price comes from. that kind of unlocks for you the dynamic of this type of business. And, it's very easy to get focused within our little industry of interest on, well, the price comes from wherever you want it, because you own a patent, because you control it, because you have a monopoly over it. However, the marketplace has all sorts of different pricing environments, which we've talked about. And this is, everything gets funneled through there. And every one of your assumptions has to go through. Is that consistent with the type of price I'm going to be able to get? If your business plan involves taking your excess profits and funneling it back into R&D, and funneling it into marketing, and funneling into buying new things to grow your business, but you have a commodity type price that just covers cost of production plus a small profit, make it enough to keep your business going, then your business plan will fail. And your whole marketing strategy has to be predicated on a knowledge of what the price, what the marketplace will give you in terms of the price. We talked earlier about toothpaste. You say, okay, I'm gonna come up with the best toothpaste in the world. My toothpaste is, whatever characteristic you want to define a great toothpaste for, that's the way I'm gonna define it, and I'm gonna charge $100 a tube for this toothpaste. How much of that toothpaste are you gonna sell? You're not gonna sell any of it. So the marketplace could care less whether it's nutritious, or whether it's kosher, or whether it's vegan, or whether dogs like it. It doesn't matter. Earth friendly. It's toothpaste. It's like breakfast cereal. So similarly, if you have a way of producing toothpaste, now toothpaste is pretty much a commodity. It's a competitive commodity. We call that oligopolistic competition, where they keep trying to parse the market, compete on everything except price. If you notice, like the whitening toothpaste and the high fluoride low cavity toothpaste and the sensitive gums toothpaste, they all cost about the same. But it's not a generic commodity price. However, if you go into this market, you want to succeed in the commodity marketplace. There's this myth that you can't make money through innovation in a commodity marketplace. You can by finding a way to produce it cheaper. So if it costs $1 to produce a typical tube of toothpaste, and you can produce it for 10 cents, then you can own that market. Because you can replicate everything else that they do and put your own brand on it and have your own kosher toothpaste and your own sensitive gums toothpaste and all that, and you can produce it a lot cheaper. Then you can own that marketplace, and you can grow through consolidating it in a competitive way there. And that's, your innovation is not in doing something that people will pay more for. You're doing something that you already know what people will pay for, but you can make it for less. So you're offering the same thing at a cheaper price. And you see this in industries that evolve, even the hotel industry. There was for a long time it was very stagnant. And then you had these big new brands that came into hotels, like these kind of upper scale, businessy type hotels that were cheaper, but still nice. And it's like, I do a decent amount of business travel. Frankly, I want clean. I want spotless. You want clean, quiet. You want the mattress to be in good shape. Beyond that, I don't care all that much. I don't need a 5-star restaurant. When I'm, in a layover, sleeping outside the airport. So there are a lot of industries where you find you can grow and innovate and become very successful and entrepreneurial without adding something that makes it more expensive, that people will be willing to pay up for. But this goes into your marketing plan. So you got your product, got your price. You can predicate your whole marketing plan on price. Go after the same market cheaper, but just as good. That's a terrific, a lot of people have done extremely well with that. Goes on with placement. Where do you put it? Where do you sell it? Pharmaceuticals, biotech is pretty straightforward. If it's office-based, the doctor prescribes it. You get it filled either online or at Dwayne Reed or wherever. Really straightforward placement. If it's, the other half is in the hospital, hospital-based medications, it's placed in the hospital. You've got to work through the hospital formulary, you've got to work through the hospital pharmacy. Each hospital has rules and regulations. So it's pretty straightforward there. You go out into the rest of the world, what's placement? Constantly evolving. You know, we probably touched early on in the book industry. You know, where were books sold? They used to be sold in little bookstores. Every town square had them. And gradually those consolidated into bigger companies, the big evil Barnes and Noble that put all the little mom and pop wonderful little bookstores out of business. And then what happens? Amazon comes and puts 4 little Barnes and Noble out of business. You guys remember Borders? Some of you do. I teach this class 5 years from now. No one's going to remember Borders. It'll be like it never existed. Borders and Barnes and Noble, they were the 2 big places you bought books. It's constantly changing, and you've got to make sure you're placing in the dominant places and the upcoming places. You'll be very aware of that. Promotion. What's promotion? Well, it's advertising. It's the way to let people know you're out there. If you've solved someone's problem, and you know the people that have that problem, you've got to let them know you have a solution. And there's a trillion ways of doing it. Over time, like in medicine, where we've gotten more and more precise about identifying the specific people that need something by parsing their diseases to a molecular level and targeting those people, rather than using, big blasting you with chemotherapy or opiates or something like that. Okay, let's knock out all your pain receptors for a while and give you opiate. Let's kill every cell that's dividing fast in your body and give you chemotherapy. In promotion, we're doing the same thing. It used to be, let's put a billboard on the side of the road, and every one of the trillion people that drive by it will see the billboard with the hopes that the few people that have premature hair loss, that need our hair loss drug, will see that and think of that. Now, we go to Google, and everybody that types, what do I do for premature hair loss? The next day, you're flashing things at them. They pull out every app on their phone, and at the little bottom, there's a teeny little ad, experiencing hair loss, click here. So it's an ever-changing means by which we do it. But the internet has allowed us, because of the tremendous throughput of information and the ability to glean that information, even in an anonymous way, without knowing the name of the person. You go to Google, you go to any of these market search firms, that I need to know everybody that's looking for a standing desk. You want to hear about standing desks for the rest of your life? True story. Spend about a day or two researching standing desks. For the next 6 months, you will see nothing but standing desks. It's really amazing. Type Peloton in there, and you're going to see every home exercise equipment, whether you want to see it or not, for a very, very long time. Which is, frankly, I think it's pretty harmless, but it's all the way the promotion is changing. And finally, the last part is people. And who do you have interacting as part of this marketing plan? There's within the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, I talk to companies all the time. The companies say, this is what we're developing. And as they get into phase 3, I'll say, all right, tell me about your commercialization strategy. And sometimes it's, we're going to partner it and let somebody else commercialize it for us. Other times it's, no, we're going to do it ourselves. If it's to do it ourselves, they start stratifying the types of people they need. And as you can imagine, the people that sell biotech drugs to doctors and or pitch them to potential patients need to possess different vocabularies than people selling something else, whatever, toothpaste. So you'll find, when these people talk to me about your commercialization plan, they say, okay, we're going to have X number of field reps. which are usually smart, personable people that still can go into doctor's offices and talk reasonably intelligently about their drug, essentially reading a script. Because if you recall, FDA approval is very, very specific, and you can't make claims that are not on the label. So you need someone disciplined who can talk with the doctors, nurses, whomever, intelligently, up to a point. And then the doctor is going to say, all right, well, I've got a patient with this problem. Are you guys, how does this drug fit into that? Your field rep is not really in a position to answer that, so they bump it up to an MSL, medical science liaison, who may be a specially trained nurse or doctor or PhD in science, or somebody that can answer the much more complex questions that come into it. And then above that, you've got the group of people that direct all of this, to make sure that they see the Salesforce.com data every day, who's making which calls, who's getting followed up to who, what are the amount of times you need to visit before a prescription is written, what kind of repeat prescriptions are written, what's the frequency of prescriptions that are written. Because all of this gets collected, there's a tremendous amount of data that we know about who's selling drugs, how it's being sold, who it's being sold to, how it's being priced, how it's being distributed. And all of that is as the CEO of your little company, expanding into commercialization. You've got to decide, what kind of layers do I need to sell this? It's it's an important part of the equation, particularly in our industry, because depending on the drug you're selling and the group that you're selling to, who your point of care is, who is your decision maker. In most cases for prescription drugs, the decision maker is the doctor, the person writing the prescription. Not always though. There are times you see a tremendous amount of direct consumer advertising. Well, you guys may not see as much as people my age do, but as you start consuming content that's directed at people a little bit older, people that, as you get older, you spend more time in doctor's offices. So the amount of stuff that we get inundated with, and the goal there is to get us to ask the doctor about it. So they do a tremendous amount of research. And one of the things that we learned before, when you've got a monopoly product at a very, very high price, i.e. a very high margin, a high gross margin, this is which we'll talk about the next hour and start talking more about accounting, you can funnel that excess profit into market research and advertising and promotion. So they know exactly who's what. They know all the 70-year-olds that are watching something that have these various problems that you have in your 70s, which is, from what I understand, a lot. So these are big consumers. Since we've gotten better at promotion, since we've gotten better at targeting, you guys are not going to get the same amount of geriatric medication promotion that I got when I was your age, consuming things, because things were just much more generalized. So we really, going from billboards to targeting advertising on the internet, we've gotten so much more focused on it. Okay, that is our course in marketing. You're all ready to have your MBAs. Okay. Why don't we take a break before accounting? And I know some of you wanted to pitch today. So let's take a deep breath. Amanda, you wanted to pitch? Who else wants to pitch today? Come on. Mute the video. It seems like a while since we had people pitching this.
Yeah. Can I see what the
Absolutely, you can read it. You gotta introduce yourself first.
Hello everyone, my name is Amelia. I'm from the GSAS company Biotechnology. Thank you. And I'm going to start with So I'm here promoting my company called Lupus Savior.
Can you guys hear me back? Okay.
I'm gonna volume up a little bit more. I'm promoting my company, which is called Lupus Savior, that we will offer a treatment for systemic lupus that has less side effects and is less costly and is more efficacious. And let's start with introducing the disease for a little bit. Systemic lupus is autoimmune disease that is caused by an overreacting B cell and T cell, and they are starting attacking your body's own cells. And there are actually more than 760,000 patients in the world in 2019. The data is collected from the Frost and Sullivan database, and the only targeted therapy before 2021 was Belten, which was developed by GSK in 2011. But in this year, August, there's a new drug that just came out, which is called Safino. Both of those drugs have slightly more side effect because one of them is targeting B cell maturation, so it's basically targeting B cell itself. So it's just stopping the overreacting and overmaturation of B cells, but instead it might harm the body's immune system in the same way. And for Safino, it's a slightly better drug because it's targeting one of the signal transmitters that got sent out by the B cells, which is called IFN1, and it's just targeted for severe and moderate lupus symptoms. It kind of blocks the signal from sending itself to other immune cells. Both of those drugs are kind of costly, and for Belten, it's costing around like 42,000 per patient each year. So with that information given, our company wants to give a better solution to the patient in the world. So we are trying to look for new targets that are more effective and less harmful overall to the body. So currently, based on my research and my team's research, we found CD40 and IL-1R, which are the two different targets that's possible for lupus treatment. So for CD40 is a cell antigen that on B cell that is unique to B cell, and we think is a really good target to have a drug developed based on that antigen, because it's blocking it specifically to B cells and is proven to be less having less side effect when it's used for other drugs. And for IL-1R, it's kind of a similar mechanism when talking with IFN1. It's a good substitution and it works kind of in a similar way. And with those two drugs, we aim for a better solution that has less side effects that are affecting the patients. So why us? We are a group of enthusiastic scientists that we're on our early phases of drug development, and we want to put our drug in clinical trials. And the reason I'm standing here right now is that we need some more support from the outside world, from the investors, because we need a more developed negotiation team with FDA and potentially EU officers. And because foreseeing this market to grow a little bit bigger, since the ratio of the older age people is getting more and more in the future and in the world, we perceive this market as a really good market, and since our drug will have significantly less side effects, we perceive our drug to take a good share of the marketplace. And that's the end of my pitch.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to critique your pitch by talking about movies. You go to the movies, and before the movie starts, they show the trailers of the movies that are coming. Did you ever see the trailer, and then you turned to the person you went to the movie with and said, I feel like I've seen the movie already, why bother seeing it? Tell me, Who are you pitching to?
I'm pitching to the investors. That's my point of view.
Okay, good. You do a little bit of bouncing around between basic knowledge, very intensive knowledge, and basic vocabulary and some fairly specialized vocabulary. So it's a way to lose people along the way. But I think it was a good pitch because you did include a lot of stuff in there. Like we know what you're doing. We know what your goal is. We know the problem you're trying to solve. What you kind of lose us in the middle there with a little bit. You drive into a lot of cul-de-sacs and drive around and around for a while, and then you come back out without hitting the stuff that an audience as sophisticated as you're implying they are needs to know. So what you want is, the goal here is, call me, let's talk. I want to hear the whole story. A lot of the whole story you tried to give now. You got, the particular targets, the CD40, the IL-1R, that's great. But why is that different? How is it different? These are things that you're going to want to be able to get into that very, very few people you pitch to at the elevator pitch stage are going to know the distinction for that. So, if we're trying to cram it into 2 minutes, what's the problem you're trying to solve? You got 750,000 people with lupus. There's 2 drugs out there, they both suck. They don't work that well, and they've got terrible side effects. Not to mention the fact they cost $42,000 a year. So, one sentence you told me, here's the problem, here's the number of people who got it worldwide. We've got 2 targets, you're going to give us a better drug, it works better with fewer side effects. Terrific. Then you go into who you are. Now, there's no one in the world that I hold in higher esteem than early career scientists tackling pharmaceutical problems. That said, you're pitching to other people than me. So, what is it specifically about you, not only that makes you good people, but better people? Then, you give me a very generic description of yourselves. We're in a drug producing lab. We're working in a lab that's discovered X targets over the years, resulted in X number of drugs. We are a bunch of B cell specialists that work in protein biology, specifically looking at targeting within something that parses it down a little bit better. And one thing that, if you're talking about levels of, down to the level of receptor, you've got to tell me where you are in development. Are you in discovery stage? You're not in discovery stage because you've got your targets. Do you have are you in lead optimization? Do you have a specific molecule? Are you in animal testing? Are you pre-IND? Have you engaged in regulatory? Where are we there? How much proof of concept do you have that you've got something that works better and has fewer side effects than the 2 sucky drugs that are out there? Because you've done a really nice job of framing the landscape for it. So there's bad drugs out there that cost a lot of money because this is a really bad disease. We've got a better solution. Hey, hint to me why. Or tell me something. So you got, was 700,000 people you said worldwide?
760.
Okay, so 750,000 people worldwide. That's a decent sized market. Not enormous, but decent size. So even I can do the math. 40,000 times 760,000. That's a big, big market. So the world is willing to spend a lot of money to solve this problem. Right now they don't have good choices. We've got better. Here's why. And rather than say we need more support, you can get at this point say we're going into, we're going from early preclinical to late preclinical. We're going from late preclinical to IND enabling, or we're going into IND enabling, that kind of stuff. And our runway, we need to raise X millions of dollars. That's okay. If you're gonna be real specific, be specific consistently. If you're not, be general, and it's okay to be general, stay general and invite questions. That's a good way to figure out the level that the person you're talking to understands. You don't want to inundate them with information that they can't process. You don't want to talk under them. But if you're not sure, starting, it's like bad disease, 3/4 million people, 2 drugs, 42,000, drugs suck, these side effects. You can, if you want to, paint the picture of why lupus is bad. You know, full body rashes, terrible fatigue, renal failure, you know, all the things you get from lupus. Chronic disease lasts lifelong, progressive, early age of death if untreated. You know, these people have to live on steroids at times, things like that. And they get these awful side effects. Well, name one or two of them. Paint a picture. It's like any good storytelling. You want to go from abstract, the concept of bad side effects, to specific. Whole body rashes, terrible fevers, you know, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, whatever the side effects are. So the better the picture you can, the more the person can walk away with specific pictures that they can see, the more they're going to remember you. And this is just kind of, you know, it's a course in entrepreneurship and biotechnology. What's the core competence we're talking about now? Storytelling. Going from the abstract to the concrete. So we covered a lot of ground there, which is good. But as you refine your pitch, if you're going to be real complex, if you know you're talking to someone that could really take it in detail, good. Be consistent that way. But make sure you're getting a little bit of feedback that they're with you. If you're not sure, assume you're talking to a really smart generalist. Maybe they know what lupus is, maybe they don't. You know, pretty much if it's a person who works within healthcare, the term autoimmune will probably mean something, but a B-cell disease probably won't. You know, it's just, so you gotta, it's a way of, you know, it's the type of thing, it's a really good first or second draft pitch that as you refine it, it's gonna flow a little bit better, it's gonna be a little bit more generalizable, and it's going to give the person you're pitching to the opportunity to engage back. And here you look at stuff. You know, you start saying, you know, it's, you know, CD40. They nodded CD40. Okay, great. You get the sign that you're talking their language. There is the eyes glazing over. We all know that thing because, you know, maybe you don't make people's eyes glaze over as often as I do, but you know, you get used to it. So you can just kind of upshift or downshift. But great platform pitch to talk about a lot of this stuff. So nice job.
Sorry, I have several questions.
Yeah, fire away. Fire away.
So, on the level of in-depthness that I should mention about I don't know, more into the molecular stuff. So, does that mean that if I would have less background information, but more into why the drugs are different?
You can make a good case for saving that for the actual presentation.
Okay.
Like when they invite you back, that's when you bring in, you say, there's 2 drugs out there, they suck. They cause these side effects, they cost $42,000, they don't work that well. Period. You can leave it at that, no matter how in-depth the person will understand. Because when they say, all right, let's get into that, suddenly you're out of elevator pitch, you're into formal presentation. That's okay. But typically start simple, and they may want to hear all that. I get pitched all the time. You know, I'm an MD. It's like I've been a healthcare investor for 16 years. When people first come up to me, and it's a pitch with a lot of pitching happens informally. You just kind of sit down with the person in the bus. Oh, you're a VC, great. Let me tell you about my thing. You know, they will kind of run off into detail that I will understand, but I don't necessarily want right there. You're talking about an interaction of 2 to 5 minutes. So if you start getting more and more specific, more and more detailed, then you're taking away time for other stuff. Talking about yourselves, answering their specific questions. You know, I would actually, I would leave the 750,000 number till the very end.
Okay.
Remember, we try to, one of the strategies is to have one number per pitch and have it be the last one. Say, here's the problem, bad disease, bad drugs, expensive, horrible stuff, better idea, works better, fewer side effects, we're brilliant, great at this. Oh, by the way, 750,000 people have this problem. It's like, you really wrap it up nicely. And the nice thing about having one number is you don't have them say, is it 42,000 people have it, and it costs $750,000? Or is it 750,000 people and it costs $40,000? When you give people lots of information quickly, especially if it's a pitch on the fly, and you're still thinking about their laundry list, then it's a matter of really grabbing them quickly. It's like the last slide we showed, the promotion.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so much detail you can put on a billboard as people drive by it. So you want to catch their attention quickly and gauge the information you can give.
So, if the way I interpret it is that, so like right now, I would say, if I want to go in depth, I should go in depth all the way if the listener is interested.
Yeah.
And if not, just don't give too much information throughout, but just keep the essential.
It's a give and take. I'm going to stop you here only because I've got 40 minutes to teach all of accounting and finance. And why don't you come see me after class? We can spend as much time as you want.
Sure.
That'd be good. Thanks.
you.
Nice job. We love being fearless. Okay, let's talk about accounting. We've mentioned accounting a couple times. We talked briefly about a balance sheet, but I got a lot of feedback and I can never figure out how much is too much for accounting and how much is not enough. But it's a language that you have to at least understand at a superficial level. One of the things you see consistently, people trained in medicine, science, and engineering that get into the business world, is they look at financial information, they see the financial statements, the balance sheet, the income statement, the cash flow statement, and they skip them. It's like, I don't speak that language, that's not me. That's a recipe for disaster. You need to grasp the you need to wrestle the financial statements to the ground, defeat them. You need to impose your will on the accounting system. The great thing is that it's easy. It's a straightforward, simple thing. Most things that are pure business are, which is why the business world has developed its own proprietary language to try to keep smarter people out. So let's talk a little bit about accounting. It's really the fourth tool of our communication. We talked before about naming, inscribing, pitching, putting together a business plan, either a formal written plan or a PowerPoint or presentation. A lot of ways of describing your company. This is all a combination of storytelling and some numbers. Accounting is the financial statements. That is the digital part of it. That is numbers, it's reproducible, it's everybody speaking the same language with minor variations. Anywhere you go in the world, you present your financials, you are talking the same language. It is, in its best cases, a great level of communication within the business world. Now, there's some bad cases too. We're going to start off talking about the beauty of accounting, because accounting is what the periodic table is to chemistry, accounting is to business. It's just a means of, let's go back to basics. It's prime numbers, it's Newton's laws. There's some basics of accounting that everybody agrees upon. And if presented honestly and with a certain set of common assumptions, it's a really great means of communicating what your business is all about, that the storytelling aspects of it doesn't really do. So there's a science of accounting, and there's a bit of an art of accounting. So what's the science of accounting? It's like in medicine. In medical school, they spend the first year talking pure science. Biochemistry, physiology, pathology, pure science. We take that science and we apply it to the disease processes. Similarly, in accounting, there's certain basic assumptions that we set that we make our reporting conform to. And it really causes, it gives us a common language. So recall, back when we were talking about finance, I told you that one of the rules that you try to follow is match the length of time that you have an asset to the type of financing you use. So if you're buying something that you're going to use up month to month, just buy it with cash on hand. If you're going to use it over 30 years, then take out a 30-year mortgage so that the asset continues to pay for itself. So you're not paying all this money up front and then having it sit there at various degrees of utilization. If you're buying a tractor that's going to last 10 years, well, take out a 10-year lease. And if you find that the tractor is less valuable than you thought it was, get out on a lease, sell them. Similarly with the mortgage. So you do that with finance and accounting. You want to get even more basic. You want to be able to match the revenue that comes in with the expenses that are used to generate that revenue, to show that the means by which you are operating is as least wasteful as it could be. So it's important as we list what our assets are and what our liabilities are. And then we look at our operations, see what the revenues that are coming in and how much it costs us to generate those revenues. And then we make sure we have enough cash on hand to pay for everything, because you can be very profitable yet not be able to pay your bills. You do those things, but you've got this nice set of numbers that anybody can look at and get a really good idea of how well you're running your business. More importantly, you have an idea of how well you're running your business. And there are things that you should be doing differently. Having assets that don't generate cash may make the company rich in assets, but operationally poor. Or maybe even make it bankrupt and insolvent if they can't pay their bills. So there's a set of rules, the United States is called GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, that we all follow in order to understand our own businesses and communicate how those businesses work to others. Now, that said, the science of accounting, there is a beauty to it. There's a logic to it. It's one of the underestimated great movers of innovation in the world, having this ability to talk back and forth and understand the mechanics. If you all pop the hood and see how the engine runs by looking at the accounting. The problem with accounting is there's a quote-unquote art to it as well. There are areas that we've given individual managers, and in some cases, the accountants themselves, discretion over how they report things. And this is where it gets messy. So in general, the balance sheet listing the assets and listing how they were paid for. The statement of operations, also known as the income statement or profit and loss statement, just listing the revenues and listing the expenses that were incurred to generate those revenues. That's platonic truth. That's nouns and verbs. That's prime numbers. That's the periodic table. And then we've got these discretionary things which screws that all up. And how does it screw it up? Well, you've got discretion over the way you report your revenue and your expense, and putting a value on it and saying when it came into being, which filters down into quote unquote the bottom line. What's the bottom line? It's literally, you list all your revenues and then all your expenses. You subtract the expenses from the revenues. The bottom line of the statement is the difference between the two, the profit or the loss. You say, what's the bottom line? Well, the bottom line is just the last line of the income statement. Now, if you choose, let's define by example. I sell you something on credit. You walk into my store and you buy a bicycle, $500. It's a nice bicycle. and you don't hand me cash, because nobody uses cash anymore. You hand me your American Express card, and you walk out with the bicycle. Have I generated $500 of revenue? Well, I think you have, because what's the likelihood American Express is going to pay for it? Pretty high. So that's good. So if I'm accounting and I want to say, do I want to recognize that 500 revenue? Yeah, I'll recognize 500 revenue. Now, let's say you don't have an American Express card, and instead you say, I don't have the money on me. I'm good for it. You scribble an IOU on a piece of paper, hand it to me, and say, I want to leave with the bicycle. Okay. Do I recognize the revenue there? I have discretion over whether I want to or not. I may want to, I may not want to. But this is the same bicycle walked out the door. I have, in an accounting sense, made a transaction that is likely to generate a profit, assuming it costs me less than $500 to make or buy the bicycle. But there's some wiggle room. Okay? So that's one example as to the revenue recognition. When do you actually do that? In pharmaceuticals, healthcare, and biotech, revenue recognition is extremely important. There are things like, for example, there are things that are reimbursed by insurance on a case-by-case basis. So I prescribe a drug, patient goes to the pharmacy, pays the copay, leaves, the copay, part of it goes back to the drug maker, and then the drug maker expects to be reimbursed for the other 80% of the drug. The insurance company may decide to reimburse it, they may decide not to reimburse it. They may have a policy that they do reimburse this drug, or they don't reimburse this drug, or they reimburse a certain percentage of it, or they do it on a case-by-case basis that goes to one of their risk managers. So, what does the pharmaceutical company recognize as the revenue? And when do they recognize it? Do they recognize the whole thing? Do they recognize a part of the thing? Do they recognize it at the time of the sale? Do they recognize it at the time of approval from the reimburser? Do they recognize it at the time when the cash comes in? All things that you have discretion over. You can decide when to do that. Same thing with expenses. Let's say we have a bicycle factory. You make bicycles. So you make them in your apartment. So you've got a big closet in your apartment, you've got stacks of aluminum tubes, and you've got chains, and you've got tape. They still tape handlebars like you used to. Anyway, you've got wires for the brakes, all this stuff. And let's say you bought some of this inventory. Some of them you buy in January, some you buy in February, some you buy in March. Let's focus on the aluminum itself, the aluminum tubes. You make your bikes out of aluminum, they're high quality bikes, nice and light. The price of aluminum, being a commodity, fluctuates month to month for a lot of things. So you buy certain amounts of aluminum at, I don't know, $10 a pound. I'm making this up, I have no idea how much aluminum costs. In January, you buy a whole bunch of aluminum at $10 a pound. And it sits there, and you always buy enough in advance so you never run out. So you got a bunch of aluminum, so you bought at 10. Then in March you have to reorder aluminum, and now the price is 15. So you reorder new aluminum, sitting there, same stuff. But you don't know if it's the January aluminum or the March aluminum. Oh, it looks the same. The only difference is how much it costs. And then you start making the bicycles from it. So you grab a tube of aluminum, you build a bicycle, you sell it. And you sell it for the same amount. Let's say you sell it for $400 to the person we talked about 5 minutes ago and sold it to the person with the item. So you make a bicycle, you charge the retailers $400. In your accounting, you've got to put down a number for the cost of what you made and sold. The first thing that you do, the first expense you have is the cost of what you sold. Yeah, the cost of what that bicycle you sold is maybe a little bit of labor. You may allocate a little bit of your apartment rent, but it's mainly going to be the total of the aluminum that you used, the chains that you used, the tape you used, the wire, the cost of the thing that you manufactured. So So you gotta put a number on that. That number's gotta be based on something. What is it based on? It's based on the amount of aluminum you used times the cost of the aluminum. Do you pay $10 or $15? Do you specifically, oh, let's see, did I grab the January aluminum or did I grab the March aluminum? There are terms, you may have heard of the term FIFO and LIFO. FIFO means first in, first out. That means no matter which aluminum you grabbed, you call it $10 because it's the first in, that's the January aluminum, the first out. If it's last in, first out, you put down $15 if you used, times the X number of pounds of aluminum used. So that the expense that you generate for doing the same thing can be reported differently. Now, why is this important? See, who cares? It's like it's a bicycle. So I wrote down, so it cost me, $300 to make instead of $325 or whatever. Well, in aggregate, these numbers add up to a lot. And depending on what you are solving for within the context of your financial documents, you can be misleading by using your discretion over how things are reported in a way that takes away from that platonic truth that we hope our accounting system gives us. Example one, you're a manager who's paid a bonus based on your profitability. So not on revenue, just on profitability. So what is your incentive within the financial statements? Your profit is anything that makes revenue look better is good for you. Anything that makes expenses look lower is good for you. So you have an artificial incentive to skew the discretion in such a way that for a given level of business activity makes the numbers look better, so your bonus is higher. Okay? So you've got that ability to do that, which is, again, not generating a consistent type of interchangeable information you want. Now, there's a system by which you have to declare the way you make these computations. So when you do your accounting, when you put out your financial statements, you literally have to go on record saying, okay, we use FIFO or we use LIFO, these are our assumptions, and you have to be consistent about it. If you're not consistent, you have to write in, this is why we're not being consistent. But this is how accounting starts deviating away and how, frankly, you can cheat. Another example, if instead of trying to maximize your bottom line for the purpose of getting a bonus, let's say you want to minimize taxes. What do? You want to decrease the reported revenue per unit of business activity. You want to increase the reported expenses for the same unit of activity so that your bottom line looks less. And you'll find these companies that make trillions of dollars and they're never paying any taxes because they have means by which they can make the revenue look lower or their expenses look higher. Cynical people will say they invent expenses, and there are expenses that can be sort of invented, that really reflect nothing about the underlying business other than you're playing to the numbers. It's like teaching to the test. It's like, let's make our numbers report something that takes us somewhere, rather than saying, let's report our numbers in a way that reflect the true operations of our business. And that's where the art of accounting can screw up. There's something called depreciation and amortization. Depreciation is just the drop-off in value of an asset you had over time. Most things you own will be less valuable as you own them. You drive the car off the car lot, it's worth a lot less as soon as you own it. You have to sell it as a used car. If someone sells you Apple sells you a MacBook, and you hold it beyond 2 weeks, and you want to sell it, you can't sell it for what you paid for it because something is used, even if it's still sealed in the box. So there's some amount of depreciation, some amount of loss of value. That may reflect just the fact that when it's distributed outside of the new channel, it's perceived as being less valuable, or it just may be worn out. it's like when you buy an old computer and the battery's got, 1,000 cycles on it already, and the hard drive, it still has a hard drive, starting to slow down, it's worth a lot less than it was new. Now, you can account for this. You put this into your income statement as an expense. Remember, we're trying to match up the revenue that was made and the expenses that were incurred to create that revenue. One of those expenses is you used up 1/10 of your truck during that year. So say, okay, I spent $30,000 on the truck, I'm gonna depreciate it over 10 years, I'm gonna write off $3,000 in truck depreciation expense as one of the costs of doing business. And that's totally legit. So when you write down the value of an asset over time, it's called depreciation. And it just reflects the fact that the asset has been used to generate the revenue that came in. And it's a way of accounting for that. Now, there's a couple of caveats to that. One is land. Land is never depreciated. Every piece of land is individual in and of itself. It's revalued when it gets sold. Or if something extraordinary happens to it, or you do some major improvements, then you can revalue the land. But typically land is, whatever you bought it for, that's what it's on the books as, which is, Columbia University owns a hell of a lot of real estate in New York. I'd be very curious to see how these various plots of land in Manhattan that they may have bought 50 years ago, what kind of valuation they placed on it. And that's just an accounting thing. Land is not depreciated. Used to be that you could amortize intangible assets. You depreciate tangible assets, you amortize intangible assets. Intangible assets like patents, like quote unquote goodwill. If Coca-Cola buys Microsoft, or nowadays if Microsoft buys Coca-Cola, and let's say Microsoft buys Coca-Cola for $100 billion, what's it getting? Well, it's getting bottles, and it's getting distribution, and it's getting factories, and it's getting trucks with Coca-Cola, and billboards and stuff like that. But most of the value of Coca-Cola is the fact that everybody knows what Coca-Cola is, and people want it. So the difference between the tangible assets that they're buying and the amount they paid gets lumped into a fudge factor called goodwill. And goodwill in the past could be amortized. Could be written off the same way you write off the value of the truck. County system changed about 10, 15 years ago to be much, much more strict about writing off goodwill. So in general, that often sits on the books unless something major happens. So Microsoft buys Coca-Cola in November of 2021. A year from now, New England Journal of Medicine shows that Coca-Cola causes weight gain above and beyond the amount of sugar in it, or it causes hair loss, or it causes something that you don't want. And suddenly nobody wants to drink Coca-Cola anymore. And Microsoft has that's $90 billion of goodwill on its books from its purchase of Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is suddenly not no good. Well, let's say they take it off the market. Microsoft is justified in writing that off. They can take an expense against that entire goodwill on their balance sheet. But in general, goodwill, patents, things of that sort, tend not to amortize. Of course, when a patent expires, the value of that patent goes up. But that's these are things that there is some level of discretion over. Like when I said before, you have a $30,000 truck depreciated over 10 years. And I'm assuming that you depreciate $3,000 a year. You can depreciate it in numerous ways. Lots of different numbers you can stick in there that will add up to $30,000 over 10 years. You have discretion over how you do that. Maybe you want to write off $15,000 of it the first year. If you can come up with a way to justify it, then you can do that. But what you're doing is you're making your expenses high that first year in a way that may or may not reflect the ongoing steady state operation of your business. So you got to be a little skeptical about some of these things. You also have to be aware of the validity of some of these numbers. If you're a public company, then you come up with your numbers and then you send it to certified public accountants to audit them, which is essentially independent arbiters that say these numbers are real, or these numbers are justified, or these numbers with the long footnotes that we told you have to put at the end are okay. And then we, whether we're Ernst & Young or whoever the accountant is, we will put our stamp of approval on it. And you can have that level of confidence that these numbers are real. And that's what certified public accountants do. You go through an audit. The audit looks at the numbers and says, yes, we who are not part of the company, although we're paid by the company, we who are not part of the company say that this is a reasonable way to present the finance of these companies. And that typically, most companies have what's called an audit committee. Like I sit on the board of one of the public companies I'm on. I am on the audit committee. And every 3 months when we're sitting about to have our earnings announcement, we have the audit committee meeting where we meet with the auditors. They go through the financial statements. They say, yeah, everything is fine. We don't like the way you presented this, or this needs a footnote, or this is a change from where you previously did it. We don't think it's justified. We think you need to go back and present it the way you used to. And that's the way the system is supposed to work. Now realize sometimes the auditors are corrupt. You've all heard of, you've probably heard of Enron. Enron was this company that was purported to sell energy that grew into like the 5th biggest company in the United States. And a lot of it was based on just absolutely fantasy world accounting, which was just signed right off by their auditing firm. And fast forward a few years, had a bunch of people in jail. That auditing firm, which was one of the biggest in the world, is gone. They couldn't survive the scandal. But that's the way by which we kind of try to check and balance it. Now, in the world of private companies and startups, you don't have quite that level. Nobody expects a tiny startup to go through a formal audit. But as you go along and as you attract investors, the investors may insist upon it. They say, listen, we want audited financials, or else we're not investing. We've got to make sure there's not a lot of fraud. And it's a whole new language. You bring in the financial accounting speakers, the people who are most fluent in that, and they're the rule keepers. So early in accounting, for the first day you open your business, you start your accounting. First thing you do, you write a check for $1,000 from your personal bank account, and you put it into the bank account of the business, and your accounting starts. And there's a whole concept from, you all remember Bob Cratchit from Christmas Carol, from Dickens. What does he do? He was the bookkeeper. The bookkeeper has a ledger. The ledger has a credit side and a debit side. And debit is defined as an increase in an asset. Remember, we have one side we have assets, the other we have liabilities and equity. What we own, how we pay for it, debt or a piece of the company. So anything that makes an asset go up is a debit. Anything that makes a liability go down or equity go down is a debit. Credit, and credit is just the opposite. Liability go up, equity go up. Asset drop is a credit. Simple Newtonian law of accounting, debits have to equal credits. No ifs, ands, or buts, they equal credits. It is one of these self-correcting quality management, quality assurance mechanisms of the accounting system. This is like the law of gravity, you can't ignore it. So what happens, you write that check for $1,000, you have an asset. What's the asset? It's $1,000 in cash. Goes up. What goes up here? Equity. You who wrote the check to start your company now has $1,000 in equity in that company. So $1,000 positive debit, $1,000 positive credit, it all equals. If you take money out, or let's say first thing you do is you buy something. You buy a used computer for $500. So you decrease your cash, that's a decrease in a asset. You increase your office equipment asset, computer, by $500, because that's what you paid for. Yeah, that $500 computer you bought, over the year, you may decide to depreciate that by, let's say you say let's do it simple, 5 years. So the transaction that involves depreciating the computer, at the end of the year, you drop your, you drop your office equipment value, and you generated an expense. The expense goes into your net income calculation. Your net income calculation flows back in either you made money, then it shows up here, and it shows up here in your equity as well. So if you made money, the $100 will show up somewhere. If you lost money, it shows up as well. It shows up either decrease in your cash balance, decrease in your equity. So this all works out, and it plays into the assets equal the liability and the equity. So you have this kind of imposed discipline on the way you use your numbers. And everything you do gets recorded. It all gets reported in the ledger. The ledger gets extrapolated into the 3 financial statements. Now, the balance sheet, which we talked about before, that's a point in time. You can generate a balance sheet at 9 o'clock in the morning, you can generate another one at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's just where we are at this specific point in time. The statement of operations, i.e. the profit and loss statement, i.e. the income statement, that has to be between 2 points. So you run your business, you bring revenue in, you generate expenses to create that revenue, and that's how you tell the story of how you went from one balance sheet to the other. That's the nature of financial reporting. And the statement of cash flows, I'm not going to get too involved in that. Just suffice it to say that your income, your expenses, your cash balances aren't necessarily all aligned, and your ability to keep running the business depends on access to cash. So it's like a kind of you got to make sure that your bank account is sufficient to keep running the business. So it's important to have that third statement. You're not going to get too involved in that. Okay. Principles, we hit that. Talked about the 3 statements, great. This is an example of the balance sheet. Okay. Simple assets up here. You start off with cash, you go through your securities, which are near cash. You go through the interest that you have received from lending some of your money. Your accounts receivable, which sometimes are broken up into short-term and long-term. Again, which numbers are most reliable go on top, which numbers are least reliable on the bottom. Then you go to your disposable assets that are easily sold off, things like inventories. If your bicycle business goes up in smoke, sell the aluminum. There's a spot aluminum market. You can do it. You pretty much can predict how much you can get from it. Property, plant, and equipment, though, the big stuff, you can't predict how much you're going to be able to sell a factory for. So that goes even lower on your list of assets. And then you come down to your liabilities and your equity. Liabilities similar. The liabilities that are most reliable in value, which are usually the shortest term liabilities, the ones that are due soon, those you put close to the amount that you're expecting in. The long-term liabilities, you have to make a best guess as the likelihood that you're not going to collect on. There's something called a bad debt expense that can go into your income statement that will flow through to your balance sheet by writing down your long-term liabilities. Okay? Now, it's not so important that you understand the specifics of specific transactions. What I want you to get a feel for in an intuitive sense is just how we translate from the operations to recording them and then reporting them in a standardized way And just so that, when you get offered a job at a startup, and you're really doing your diligence, you say, well, what kind of financial position is the company in? We'll say, well, show you our financials. You'll have some idea what you're looking at. And then as you start your companies, you'll know what's expected of you. This is not difficult. It's really, there's lots of numbers and a lot of grids, and it all looks fairly routine, very regimented. It's actually, the accounting principles are very, very straightforward. But it's one of those languages that, frankly, it's so boring that none of us really want to learn it if it's not what we do. But it's one of those take your medicine type things where it's so worth it to be conversant in balance sheets and income statements, so you know what people are talking about. One of the goals is when you're a scientist, you're an engineer, you're a doctor, you want to go into the business world, stay as long as you want in the room when the decisions are being made. And be in a position to make them yourself. Don't let anybody talk in a language that you can't speak. Which means you guys gotta learn accounting. Anyway, we're out of time. I will be in touch, the next day or two about next week. Next week, I think, is our last formal class. Is that possible? I may make a fiat decision that I insist that you guys come back next semester because I've come to like you a lot. So I will let you know. But I'll be in touch later on, and if anybody wants to talk after class, I'll be there for you. Okay, just gotta turn off the Zoom. I'm gonna turn off the video. Turn this thing off.
She's on the left.